Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen students of color to prepare for grad school. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Bu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into and successfully navigate grad school. For over 10 years, I've been helping first-gen students of color get into top grad programs in their field, and I'm really excited to support you on your academic journey too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette, and today we're going to be talking about how to get acquainted and harness your intergenerational power for career success. I feel like this is such an interesting topic already. So our special guest is Dr. Luna Muñoz, who is an associate coach for Durham University. Luna was a lecturer in higher education, earning national prizes, and has over 100 publications, including opinions on higher education. She now helps mid-career academics to get clarity on career moves while taking a radical, compassionate approach. Welcome to the podcast, Doctora Luna.
Encantada. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you because we've had, conversations in the past, and I'm glad that you were willing to come on the show. And for folks who don't know about like who you are, what you do, and your backstory, I would love for you to get us started that way by sharing a little bit more about what you do and whatever you're comfortable about your background story and what made you who you are today.
Thank you for having me. So I'll keep it brief, but my family's from Puerto Rico. My mom and dad were born in Puerto Rico. My dad moved away when he was, I think, 11 and went to Harlem, Spanish Harlem in New York. This was like the 50s. And then my dad and my mom met in Puerto Rico in San Juan when he was going there visiting. And he probably was like the coolest, like older guy. And he's like, I'll take you to New York. And so I was born almost on a hippie commune in Vermont because he was really into like all that kind of free love and drugs and everything like this. Yeah. I think my mom said he took the drugs when she went to the hospital. Like they were like, here's your like painkillers. And he was like, I'll have some of that. that was like early 70s, right? And then we moved around a lot because my parents were kind of, free bodies. And we moved to Puerto Rico when I was 7 to be with my grandparents and get my mom clean, because she'd been partying a lot. So I was raised by my grandmother and my grandfather for a while, actually, like all of me and my cousins, throwing chancletas at each other all day long. And then I left when my mom remarried, and we ended up in New York, and that's where I did my undergraduate, and went to LA because I thought I'd get into PhD programs, did not get into the 16 that I applied to. So the one I got into was Penn State. So went back across the country to Penn State, did not have a good time there at all. My supervisor didn't get tenure. I wasn't offered another supervisor. I was told I was being greedy for wanting a supervisor. I was running the lab.
I just this week recorded a podcast on institutional neglect. And so it's just wild that you're talking about that, about your advisor not getting tenure and you not really getting that support, because it's so real. So I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
It's like once I realized a lot later on that led to me doubling my student loan debt because, you then have living costs, which, when I went to University of New Orleans, my stipend was a lot lower. I'd had full scholarship to go to Penn State where I wouldn't have to do TAing or anything. And they let it run out without giving me a supervisor. So I then had no more scholarship. So I went to New Orleans It was a lower stipend. I had to work my butt off to have the, to actually be able to live. And then, I mean, luckily at the end of it, I got a PhD. I really was thinking about, why am I doing this? But if people are in that phase of like, why am I doing this? I think do have those conversations with yourself, because I wish that I'd had a little bit more, compassion for myself, and not just being like, but Luna, this is the American dream. Like, this is the American dream. Your dad didn't graduate high school. This is like what you're supposed to do in order to prove that, you're not like what they'd say in the UK, like skiving off the system, like, just living off of benefits, because that's how me and my mom lived for a long time, especially in New York, where she got a divorce, and there was domestic violence, and so we were escaping that. So I wish I'd had that conversation, but I did not.
Wow.
And I continued on with what people said was the next step, which was you do a postdoc next. Even though I had been offered a job in juvenile justice services in New York.
Oh, wow.
To change and make the justice system for juveniles more compassionate. But I didn't do that, because they said, you'll never be able to go back into academia ever again. So I went to do my postdoc in Sweden, and then I did my assistant professorship, associate professorship in England. So I thought, I'll avoid that whole tenure system. But actually, everywhere I went, it just felt like wherever I went, there was, gender inequality, racism, or both at the same time. And I just didn't really feel like I was able to kind of make it in the system. And I was working so hard to bring the students who came from similar, maybe like impoverished backgrounds or working class backgrounds, or who were ethnic minorities in the UK. I worked tirelessly to help them, and that was what I was most proud of. And I realized that wasn't being recognized or valued. And when I finally came to that realization, when I came to that realization, I was also under redundancy threat. So they were saying, we're going to lay you off. Your job's no longer needed. Although I was working in health during the pandemic. Your job's no longer needed. We don't need health. We're done with health. So, but coincidentally, that happened after I talked to HR about racism. And I heard you should not talk to HR about any issues where you don't want to have them defend the organization, because that's really what they're there for. But I've been naive my whole life. Believing in the American dream, believing that, if I come to England, maybe things will be different. And another country's probably not misogynistic or racist. No, actually. But at least I get to know that everywhere I go, I can fit in anywhere.
I thought you were going to say, at least I know everywhere I go, I will face similar issues.
Yeah, because I've adapted, right? So wherever I go, I'm like a fish. I can just adapt to this, to this pollution in the water. I've adapted so far.
Wow. Yeah, I know that is a whole other episode, talking about your experience with your former institution, but we won't go into the details. But okay, so I did have a question actually about your experience having been a lecturer, having worked in higher ed, and how, I mean, I guess, I don't want you to, you can share whatever you're comfortable sharing, but like, how did that shape your understanding of power dynamics in academia? And then, because you're here to talk about intergenerational power. So I mean, there's definitely a relationship there between the power dynamics we experience among institutions and then taking our power back. So can you share your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, my experience as a Latin American across two countries, one which doesn't really know about Latin Americans, I mean, England is not, they're just like, I don't really know what, you're just American. And then having lived in the US. The power dynamics are such that as a woman, I've always been under the pressure to perform duties that are about pastoral care. Being compassionate, being empathetic, taking care of the students every time I've gone to interviews for lecturing jobs. It's always been like, well, how do you support our students? How will you support our students? And then there's extra pressure on not only office hours, but being there to, support them for sometimes I'd have meetings with students that were 2-3 hours, especially during the pandemic, because that's what I felt the pressures were. And one of the realities is when you're looking at for example, the redundancy, I know we're not going to talk about like what happened with that, but the people that were saved from their jobs being not needed anymore were the people who were directors of research, but not the equality diversity chairs. So you can imagine who are the people that are electing to be in that position, in the equality diversity position. You can think about who is pressured to do those jobs. For example, I had been in that job. And who's in the director of research positions. So, the person that was saved, their job was saved, was a white male. So, there's so much pressure to conform to our gender norms, to our norms of what people believe as like a Caribbean person, for example, and what they should be like. And I've had many comments from students like so-called Dr. Luna on feedback forms. This impression that how could you be a real doctor? Wow. If your name is Luna Muñoz, So, and I think my idea about this intergenerational power, if I can kind of like segue into that, is part of what I came to realize is that I was compliant within this idea of who I am. I took the equality diversity role. I took on pastoral care. I tried to be more like motherly. I tried to wear more dresses and skirts because I thought maybe that's how I would get to be liked more. And I was so much around, I was driven by people pleasing and significance and markers of like, I am the good girl. I am the good, person for this role. I don't make any waves. And I could do that for a little while, but sometimes I'd start to make waves. I'd just be like, like pushing the water and being like, what does that do? Oh, okay. Which gave me ideas that I wasn't going to fit in long term. But the intergenerational power that I realized I had was my dad had already made a big wave while he was alive, and the way that he connected with people and the way that he could read people and read auras and understand people's histories and where they were coming from and be able to help them to kick the habit. He couldn't do it for himself, but he was able to help people out of their heroin addictions. He was hired by universities to speak to, as a person with lived experience of addiction, to speak to people about how he has created these clubs where people support each other to quit addiction. So there's that element of it that I realized, but then I also, on top of that, had another layer of he probably wasn't paid very much to go to the university to give his absolute knowledge. And then I thought, what knowledge have I been giving to the university that has not been paid for? And that only I could have given to the university, that only I possess that knowledge in the way that, and I perceive it, and my perception is unique, and I've been giving that away, and has led to some burnout because I've been giving it away, and it's felt frustrating to me to be giving away this special thing and not be recognized, not get anything back. And then that's where the realization came from.
I'm thinking about how there are so many people who are going to listen to this episode and realize, what am I giving away? What are my strengths and my talents that I'm just giving away for free for institutions that take that for granted? And also they might be thinking, well, then how do I harness intergenerational? What is my intergenerational power? So maybe can you say a little bit more about what you mean by intergenerational power? I know that you referenced your dad and the work that he did and his knowledge. But if you were to define it or to describe it in some way, how are you how are you referencing this term, or what do you mean by it?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research on, obviously I lived in Puerto Rico for, I think it was 5-6 years, but I did a lot of research on what is Puerto Rican history, right? What does it mean to be a Boricua? And what is our spiritual history, as well as, the history you can find in a book or on Wikipedia. I started to learn about the things that I was really passionate about, like our music history. I don't know if anybody has listened to La Brega, but definitely that podcast is amazing. Bad Bunny and, all that kind of stuff. But even before that, and where the contribution to jazz and all, so there is a lot of power already that I can tap into. I'm also a professional dancer, so I do that on my free time. And I think that comes from, a lot of our salsa and merengue and all that kind of stuff that, and once I realized, how do I do salsa? Like, what's special to me in the way that I approach salsa? What's special to me in the way that I approach, training somebody new in something, whenever I would teach? How did I approach research? What did I do that no one asked me to do? I just kind of, designed it myself. And so it does take a lot of, if you start to look at what's it called, the Nap Factory, and the Nap Ministry.
Yes.
And Trisha Hershey's book on rest.
Rest is resistance. Yes.
Rest is resistance. Oh my God, that changed my life. And I think in rest, and even rest could be because I think I, have trouble resting with kind of my ADHD. Even just crocheting or baking or anything like that is, to me, restful. Or even doing Pilates. And in those moments where your brain doesn't have to be thinking about the emails and answering your supervisor or whoever, you get little clarity sparks. And that's when I started to realize, when I dance, I feel healed. And then I started to research bomba and how much bomba is resistant. So our folkloric dance is resistant. Capoeira in Brazil is resistance. And so it was about
you're getting into performance studies here. I took some performance-based performance theory and dance theory courses when I was in graduate school. So you saying this, capoeira's resistance, salsa, all the different, they really are when you look at the history and the roots of them. Yeah.
Yes. And then I connected to the way that I approached those, which was always about connection, contribution. I loved sharing ideas with other people. And I realized that's exactly how I do my research. I love connection, collaboration, and sharing.
Yes.
And, if you follow the way that research is done, it's a lot of, only now are we talking about open science, but it's been quite closed. It's been gate kept.
Yes.
It's been held by lone geniuses. And I started to realize those are not intergenerationally what I subscribe to. I've been trying to fit into it. I've been trying to have the sole authored paper. I've been trying to, be first author on so many number of papers. But I realized that was draining me a lot because I was fighting. I was swimming upstream. Yeah. And I think if people listeners, if you find what's really draining to you, that's probably because it's not aligned with the way that you naturally want to work.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think then you start to and then once you start researching some of your history, you start realizing that some of the ways that you work are because of what you've, through osmosis, whether it's through your parents, your grandparents, or, I don't know whether there's like a DNA that kind of gives you it, but there is something different. And I think it's useful to see where you come from and where these
Yeah.
traits come from. And in the same way that I like to be accountable compassionately, because I know that I was chasing these markers of success that I was sold by colonialism, capitalism. And it's about having compassion, that I have been complicit in my own oppression, but it came from decades of being in school and being taught things. It came from decades of listening to the media. It came from decades of
Yeah.
absorbing, just do it, and all the, all the things, all the messages that we are open to as we grow up. And so it's not about blame, although there are so many people in the system.
Yeah.
That there is accountability and blame on each of those. But then it's within that opening your eyes, you then are able to kind of go, okay, I can see the bigger picture and how I chose these paths. I now have a commitment, accepting the path and a commitment to drive forward.
Yeah. When you're talking about intergenerational power, when you were talking about how things get passed down, I'm reminded about how, there have been studies that show that trauma gets passed down genetically. And how when like we are born, like I think we have like our grandparent or grandmother's genetics or something like that. Anyway, I clearly do not know the science behind it. But what it also makes me think about is if trauma gets passed down, then power gets passed down as well. And so that's what I think you're referring to in this case. And the other thing it reminded me of, so you're talking about intergenerational power. And I'm trying to remember I'm like starting to blank out on the second thing. But I guess just going back to how that is really important. It's really important to acknowledge the things that make us us. And it's part of I was going to say that the second thing that came to mind is when you're saying, okay, you need that self-compassion, that compassion is key because we've been taught to these things that have been ingrained in us by, like you said, colonization, white supremacy, patriarchy, etc. I was having a meeting with one of my coaches, one of my business coaches who focuses on supporting women of color. And she caught me saying something that was self-deprecating and was like, I like encouraging me to think a little bit more about like where that came from and like, why is it that I have this need to want to do things the perfect way or want to become an expert before I even share with someone else? And like, where did that come from? How did I get taught that you have to do things a certain way, otherwise it's not good enough? And I'm like, yes, white supremacy, yes, colonization, yes, patriarchy, yeah, like we can go on and on and on. Yes. But if we are more self-aware or are able to reflect on that, there's a lot of power in that. So I guess I am wondering, like, for folks who are just like listening to this and thinking, well, that's nice, but like, how do I get there? I'm just starting, I'm just starting this process of like personal growth and getting to know my family lineage and history and like who I am and what my strengths are, what my powers are. Like, what tips or advice would you give them for starting that process for becoming more self-aware and self-compassionate and like learning more about their powers?
Yeah, I love having people take like some empowerment words and words that are descriptive of people, humility, integrity, leadership, curiosity, all these different kinds of words, and giving those words to other people to mark you, like, which ones of these really remind you of me, because I don't feel that was the first thing I started to do. I still have the notepad on my phone when people would DM me sometimes, Luna, when I think of you, I think of blah, 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 blah. Or, thanks for being so blah, blah, blah. Or, I love that you're whatever. Because I don't know if I'm like you, but in terms of I used to have a lot of self-defeating thoughts.
I think I thought I was doing a lot better, and then she caught me and I was like, oh, dang.
I probably have the same. What that means is I'm looking for information that validates what I already think, which means I'm looking for information when people say, like, oh, you did that wrong, Luna. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna tattoo it in my, Whereas when people are like, oh, you're so courageous, I just go, and then I have no idea what they said because I don't really pay attention to it. I don't ruminate on it. Yeah. I ruminate on all the negative stuff.
That's true.
And I think if we repeat words that people say to us, like now when people are like, oh, Luna, you're so inspirational. I'm like, I'm really thinking about what that means for me. Like, what does it mean to be inspirational? Or when you say I'm brave, I'm really, trying to get my head around that. And what do you classify as brave? And I'm really trying to like baskinate rather than ruminate. Yes. Bask in it rather than.
I'm like, I love that. I'm gonna start using that as a word. Don't ruminate, bask in it.
And also collect it, right? Put it in your whatever you keep, your journal or whatever, and really try to outline it and give some examples for yourself. Like when I think, like when somebody says to me, wow, you're so brave, Luna, especially during the redundancy, because I was on the picket line every day. I was on Zoom meetings for all over the country, crying and telling my story so that people would donate.
And in the media too, right?
On the media, like everywhere, like the local news. I was like, Danny, hi, I've got a quote. For the local newspaper, the Liverpool Echo. I was like, Danny, come over. It took so much out of me, but it meant with every little bit that I would be in the news or I would, come to Zoom meetings, it meant that somebody would donate money to our cause. I was the amazing activist. I didn't know I had that in me, but it takes a challenge, right, to understand our strengths as well. So I think, think about these things that people say to you. Ask people for when you think of me, what do you think of? It's harder to know ourselves than other people see us.
Yes. I mean, that's one of the things that I encourage folks to do when they're trying to identify their strengths is to ask for feedback, ask others, what do you think of when you think of me? Or what do you think that I'm really good at? And I know it can be uncomfortable at first if you're not used to doing it. And like you said, a lot of us will push away the compliments and really focus too much on the critiques or the negative critiques. But it is helpful to think, okay, what do I keep hearing over and over and over again? Okay, that's definitely something, They're not just making it up.
Yeah. And then do the dissection of it. Because we dissect, like if somebody's like, God, you seem really selfish today, Luna. I'm like dissecting it. I'm like, in what way have I been selfish? Oh yeah, and there's that one time I ate the last pizza, just like I'll start looking for every single evidence. Whereas I don't do the same when somebody says, you're, such a humorous person or a fun person. I'm like, all right, yeah, I've got a hula hoop upstairs and I like
You would. I love it. I haven't touched the hula hoop since I was under 10 probably.
We need to try this.
No, because I could never do it.
The weighted ones. That's what somebody told me. Get a
Never
weighted
tried
one.
that. Oh, fun. That does sound like fun, something to try out.
I hope people will try
Yeah.
it.
So, one thing that I also wanted to hear more about, because you do work with academics and you are, I believe, a mid-career academic coach. So you work with mid-career professionals, by professors. And I would love to hear more about the ways that you support them, even though my audience is primarily undergraduate and graduate students and recent graduates. Like, I would like for them to be exposed to the world of coaching and what that looks like and the kind of support that they could have access to if this is something that they're interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason why I chose the mid-career like clientele is
Mhm.
because there's that there's that long period of conditioning, right? Where you are
Yes.
conditioned to believe success comes in one flavor, that you start emulating like more, I don't know whether it's masculine energies or something like this,
Mhm.
but I definitely felt like, oh, I need to be more assertive, and I need to be more powerful, and I need to stop giggling, and I need to, there was so much that people told me I was too much, even as a PhD student, when I taught my first class and I had an observer, my professor, he was like, stop giggling. You seem like
Wow.
you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, oh, okay. Like, okay. And it just perpetuated itself that I still remember it today, right? Like, this is
Wow.
like
Yeah.
20 something years later. Um, and I think what's helpful with the people that I work with. So I do work with some people who are just finishing their PhDs, and usually those are people who are Latin American or people of color, because I think for them, they've had that conditioning for a long time, that they feel, I need to decondition myself from
Yeah.
the expectations that the only way to succeed is this, that I'm going to be a failure if I don't do that. I mean, my dad, the reason why he was an addict was because he was never able to make it as a real man, is what he said. Because he never had a job, he was never
Yeah.
able to provide for his family. And that's exactly what Latin American men are, I mean, again, misogyny is like, detrimental for everybody.
Yeah.
But he had those expectations of this is success. And I think, so he went through school and had already all of that conditioning. And so I feel like a lot of my drive and what I love to do is to see people get out of that fog, get out of that conditioning. And like you said, I love the way you said that, like, trauma's in your DNA, but so is this intergenerational power, because it does, you don't, I mean, I don't like the whole like victim mentality idea. I don't think that that's fair to say to people.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that empowerment is, and hope and optimism, and
Yeah.
I call it like weapons grade optimism. Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
regardless of all the crap, that there is something that you can do. There's something in your control. And
Yes.
that's what I love when I see, that's what I loved when I was in academia, was seeing students who'd come from like mining backgrounds in England, whose
Mhm.
parents never went to university. And then now one of them is working in parliament, which is,
Wow.
she's just amazing. And she said, I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, Luna. And that's what I really get a lot of joy from. And that's what I feel like I have special, abilities to help people with. So in terms of doing that work yourself, is doing the stuff that you're saying, like figuring out what your strengths are, but allowing those strengths to be more than like, question what other people have said strengths are. Start to question what other people said success is. What is
Yes.
success? Success is the work that you do with like making it more inclusive for people who are neurodiverse, people with disability, and making that really public and getting it into people's minds in a different way than maybe they were perceiving it before. And I think that's, that could be success. Me
Mhm.
helping my child who I learned has, a disability. And that's what I think of success is now,
Yes.
is being a mom who now listens, whereas I used to, oh, I have to have all the answers because I'm the parent. So I think if you start to outline what is success for me, and that's going to take a long time. It's not like, okay, I have this weekend. It does take rest and reimagining and, because you're blossoming something new in yourself, and that takes time, and it takes water and oxygen and light, and if you can do those things for yourself, they'll become more apparent. But then it's also about connecting with what are your skills are, and questioning the binary, about whether you're a success or you're a failure. Is
Yeah.
that really a binary? There's so many, I grew up knowing that I was bisexual. And now I'm starting to go, wait, if I'm not bi on that one, like I'm bi, I'm more than that. I'm not
Yeah.
just heterosexual or homosexual. Are there other binaries that I've been living in that I could escape?
Yes.
My child is non-binary in
Yeah.
terms of their gender. So, there's so many ways to now rethink maybe this isn't the way for me, and outlining your own path forward of what you want. And if it's not money, then how do you make enough money? How much money do you need? Think about your like pension or retirement fund, and then go, okay, how much do I need to live in a place, and backtrack, right? And go like
Yes.
reverse engineer what you need to make that happen, so that we're not always just striving for, because I
I
kept
see so many people who
striving.
just strive for more, 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 more until they burn out. And
Yeah.
no, you don't have to just grow exponentially for no reason. It makes sense to figure out to do that exercise in lifestyle design of like, okay, what is the ideal life that I can envision for now? You can change it later and then work
Yes.
backwards from there. It's very,
Yeah.
very helpful. Yeah.
We're back to performance because it's like a choreography. There's no work-life balance.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
choreographing
I'm
your
always
life.
like, oh, blah, blah, blah. We're choreographing this or we're curating that. We're performing. I'm like, oh, I can sense like my grad school, like training coming back. Once an academic, always sort of an academic, even if it's a recovering academic.
It's true. No, it's like there's not really a work-life balance. There's a choreography, Sometimes you're
Yeah.
balanced on one foot, but as long as you can do that without falling over or breaking your hip, I'm thinking that's a success.
That's so
So
funny.
yeah, I think that's the biggest part, and getting around like, your mindset around success and money and what's enough for you. And yeah, I think it's more of that kind of work, as well as, kind of like your CV and your resume and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. But that's the little work. It's gaining your confidence and knowing that, I deserve better, and then being able to see that there's an abundance of jobs in a way, and I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me, and I have the power to walk away and say no.
Yes.
Obviously, like, I mean, there's times when I haven't been able to say no, and you have to pay like the bills, or like
Mm-hmm.
you have to eat. But I think there is an empowerment in knowing what you want, what kind of lifestyle you want, and being able to like make that happen as best as possible. But know like your negotiables, like being like,
Yes.
I definitely don't want to negotiate on plantains. They need to have that where I live. That's my non-negotiable. They have to have
Yeah.
plantains around here. But then there's other things I might negotiate on. Like I might go into work 2 days a week, depending on how far I have to travel. So it's really knowing your lifestyle and which ones are non-negotiable and which ones are like set in stone. This is what I need to actually just thrive and not burn out.
Right. Yes. I know we are getting close to wrapping up. So I wanted to ask you if you had any other closing words or, last words of advice for our listeners who are curious about strengthening or harnessing their intergenerational power, or just in general are looking to do this work, this personal growth work. Yeah.
I think emotions were hard for me. I don't know if they're hard for other people, but I found them really difficult to sit with. I'd spent a lot of my childhood just, because I had a lot of negative experiences, putting them on the back burner and repressing them and being like, happy-go-lucky, you're supposed to be chilled out, you're supposed to be, I had a closet full of like emotions while I was like trying to look chilled, and I think that really, it's informative once you start connecting with your emotions and understanding how you're feeling and really feel it in your body, and connecting through the breath to your body. You start to become more aware of this intergenerational power. You start to become aware of things that are frustrating to you, and whether your stomach is getting tight or your shoulders are getting tight. And that is probably telling you that whatever you're doing is outside of alignment with yourself. But more importantly, it'll probably burn you out in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think being aware of the things that light us up is great. And a lot of people talk about like, find your passion, find your purpose. But I think also finding your frustration paths, because that's going to tell you what your values are just as much as the things that light you up. Your values are, I'm really angry about, for example, the redundancy, which was unfair and targeted more women and targeted more people who were part of a union, union busting activity kind of. And I realized that's a values-based attack for me. That's my values of integrity. That's my values on equity and fairness. And now I know going forward, I need to work in a place that's going to honor that. So I think become aware of your emotions is the most empowering thing for everybody.
That's really great. Thank you for that. I'm glad that you are reminding folks that like there's the two sides or the two-pronged approach of identifying your values. You can look to formative, positive experiences, and also on the other end, those things that anger can be used as a fuel for a lot of things. And sometimes it's a fuel for leading you to identifying a really strong core value. So thank you for that. So for folks who really want to connect with you, want to follow up, want to stay in touch, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Luna Muñoz. I have a Facebook group, which is free for anybody to come on to, which is the Great Academic Escape. And we have a lot of conversations about hobbies and just everything. So it's more of the kind of emotional part of escaping academia.
Wow.
But just getting clarity. A lot of people stay in there because they just want to get clarity on what they actually want.
I love that. I'm going to make sure to add those links to the show notes, and I might join that Facebook group too, because I didn't realize you had it.
Oh my God, did I forget to tell you?
It's okay. Well, thank you so much, Luna, for coming on here, for sharing your story, your knowledge, your insight, your wisdom, todo. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. I love you. Thank you.
Oh, I love you too. Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring podcast. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review of the podcast. If you leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, you become eligible for a free half-hour coaching session with me. Yes, that's right, 1 free session. Once you leave a review, you can email me a screenshot and I'll send you a link to sign up. The second way to show your love is to get yourself a copy of my free 15-page Grad School Femtoring kit, which includes resources on research, organization, grad school, and career prep. Go to gradschoolfemtoring.com/kit to get it today. The third and last way to support my show is to follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally TikTok with the handle @GradSchoolFemtoring. Thanks again, and until next time.